Availability. We're joined now by Steve O'Donnell, our Chief Racing Development Officer and Executive Vice President. Steve, if you could just touch on the qualifying today, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I wanted to make a few comments on the qualifying session today, and I think, as everybody knows, this format was put together by NASCAR, with feedback from the industry, but ultimately to be as exciting as possible. And we used it last year in Daytona for the summer race. We made some adjustments from there going into Talladega. Obviously learned throughout that, and then came into Daytona with some minor adjustments for the Daytona 500 as well. And so if you look at group qualifying as a whole, we felt it worked really well, but certainly there's some challenges on super speedways. And one of the reasons we moved away from single car qualifying is, I think you've heard that from the drivers as well. A lot of things go into it: aero packages, oils, different setups based on one lap, not really based on a race setup. You heard Jeff Gordon and others also talk about putting it back in the driver's hands a little bit more, and those are things that we liked. I can say we certainly don't want to see wrecks of any kind. Not lost on us how much work goes into these cars by the teams, the efforts for our biggest race of the year. And I'd close by saying I believe we've got a really good track record of making adjustments where we need to. So we'll certainly evaluate what took place today. We'll continue to get feedback from the industry, from the drivers, as we did to get to where we were today. And then lastly, we just want to say a big congratulations to Jeff Gordon. His last Daytona 500, and we're excited to see him lead us off in the pole position as we head into next Sunday's race. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions anyone might have.
Okay, we'll start with Nate, and then we'll go to Jenna, and then we'll go to Jim.
Nate Ryan, NBC Sports. Steve, you mentioned that you made some minor adjustments after Talladega last October. Obviously, there were a lot of the complaints there. What adjustments did you make, and were there any things that happened today that perhaps were complained about then that you wish you might have addressed and might look at going forward?
It's a good question, Nate. I think when we looked at it, some of the things you saw take place on pit road today, we were hoping to avoid. And then some of the drivers, how they entered the track on a super speedway. We put some rules in place for today's session to avoid incidents, candidly. Blocking, we were going to monitor. We said that we could look at things to disallow times, but that was more on how you entered the track coming up to speed. So some of those were put in place, but I think those are areas we need to continue to look at.
Okay, we'll go to Jenna and Jim, and then Bob.
Jennifer, AP. Steve, it seems like every driver who didn't make it to the final group hated this format pretty vocally. How much input have they had in what you do on super speedways? Do you have a sense of what they want to do?
Another good question. We all share the same vision with the drivers. They want to put on the most exciting race possible. And so we all knew that single car qualifying was a challenge for us. And so there are a lot of different ideas out there. We do believe this is a more exciting feedback. But when you hear from Clint Bowyer, Tony Stewart, that's passion. This is the biggest race of the year. They want to make the race, and we understand that. So I think as we look at that, if there are ways we can make adjustments, we will. Not everyone's going to be happy. That's part of this. Cars have always historically gone home from Daytona, and that's tough. We know how big this race is, but yes, we will have continued conversations with them.
We'll go to Jim, and then Bob, and then down here to Mike Neff.
Oh, Dustin
Jim.
Long.
No, sorry. Go ahead, Dustin, then back down to Jim. Sorry.
Dustin Long, NBC Sports. Steve, Brian has talked about in the past that he's fine with drivers making comments, but don't disparage the product. And certainly some of the comments that came out, I guess, what's NASCAR's stance on the comments of Clint Bowyer and Tony Stewart? Will there be a discussion on that? Are they clear, or are they facing any type of penalty for comments on social media or publicly today?
Yeah, I think what Brian has said is you can take us on. We're NASCAR. That's part of our job. And when I look at the comments that Clint made or Tony made, those are based on wanting to see the best racing out there. So, certainly tough to hear, but, those are things we got to have conversations with them and work with those guys to figure out if there's a better way to do it. We will do that. but it's not something that we're going to go find the drivers for today.
Let's go down to Jim, and then over to Bob, and then down here to Mike Neff. So Jim Utter right over here, please.
Jim Utter, Charlotte Observer. I think you kind of touched on this in your answer to Nate, but would you say that most of the problems that you heard from participants today about what transpired were more a result of teams and drivers gaming the system or the format itself?
I think what you saw today was all of the above, Jim. Congratulations, Jeff. Hey, Jeff, can you... No, thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you. That concludes my remarks. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, man. No, I think it's a good question, Jim. I think it's with any format we put together, even the Daytona 500 as a race. There's strategy that goes into it. I think what you did see today was the driver had more input or more of an impact on what happened in the outcome. But there are things we can learn from that. We don't want to see wrecks. If there's a way to avoid that, a lot of you talked to us about qualifying races, and that could be a result of those as well. So we'll take a look at all of those things and see what the best thing we can do is if we need to make adjustments.
Okay, we'll go to Bob, Mike Neff, and then over to Lewis.
Bob Hockris, ESPN. When determining whether to make changes to this format, how much is it driver input and how much of it is fan input?
I'd say it's we look at input from the entire industry, Bob. So you're going to take fan feedback. You're going to talk to the drivers. We're going to talk to the owners. We're going to talk to the crew members. That's a little bit of how we got to where we are today and going away from single car qualifying, taking input from all of those folks we talked about. So it's a balance for us, and ultimately it's our job to make a decision. Not everyone always agrees with that, but we've got to make that decision at the end of the day.
Over here to Mike Neff, to Lewis, and then we'll go to Tom over there.
Mike Neff from frontstretch.com. Steve, over here to your right.
Oh, sorry.
When the knockout qualifying was announced in 2014, you had it everywhere except at Daytona, and they said it was because of the unique qualifying format here and the prestige involved. What went into the decision to decide to actually implement it for this year, and is there any consideration due to the prestige and the week-long build-up to this race about possibly going back to the old way?
Well, what went into it goes back to what I talked about earlier, was seeing how knockout qualifying worked over the past year. And we saw some terrific results. We saw some of the qualifying sessions, move from cable over to network. Fans saying they were really excited about it. We tried some things at super speedways and knew we had to make some adjustments. But you couple that with conversations with a lot of the race teams about how much work and effort went into a single car lap, and how that really didn't apply to the race. And if there were ways that we could put that focus on the race car that was going to compete in the 500 versus a 1 or 2 lap qualifying session, that's really what led to it.
Over to Lewis, and then Tom, and then back over to Pete Pistone.
Louis Frank Reuters. My best legalese. My question was asked and answered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom's right next to him. Tom, and then Pete, and then over down here to Lee.
Hey, Steve, Tom Jensen, FoxSports.com. Are you in kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation for exactly the reason we saw with Jeff walking out? Whoever wins the poll or runs well in the system is going to be happy, and whoever doesn't isn't?
I think there's always going to be those that like it and those that don't. But I'd point back to, if you could put this session in place today, and you could tweak maybe what happened on pit road, and you don't see an incident that happens, maybe there's a different story. So we've got to balance all of those things now as we look at it. Was it more exciting? Were there more people talking about qualifying? Hopefully so. And what does that result in? At the end of the day, we'll talk to Joey Chitwood, we'll talk to the folks at Fox, and we'll balance that with everybody in the garage and make sure that we're doing what's best for the entire sport. We can't just rely on one driver or one owner or the track. We've got to really balance that and see, what's in the best interest of the entire sport.
Okay, we'll go to Pete, down here to Lee, and then to Jeff Gluck. Pete, hold.
Pete Pistone, MRN.com, and SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. OD, you mentioned the pit road and sitting there on pit road. That's counterintuitive to auto racing. it seems to me, though, no matter what time you put on that, you're still going to run into they're going to wait to the very last minute. How much of a challenge is that going to be?
Well, I think that's something we'll talk to the industry about. Can you do some things? I've already seen some suggestions on Twitter, suggestions from some of the folks in the room. Could you roll the cars off with a pace car? Could you do some different things? So, I think those conversations need to take place. And if there's a way to avoid, seeing what we did on pit road, we're definitely going to do that.
Down here to Lee, please. And then we'll wrap it up with Jeff Gluck.
LeeSpencerMotorsport.com. After the race, on the 20 radio, Jason Radcliffe said there was a few seconds added to the clock in the last minute for the final round of qualifying. Is there any accuracy to that? Because Kenseth said his timing was off, and that was the reply that the crew chief gave the driver. Because everybody had been sitting there on pit road and waiting, kind of playing chicken. And he basically said that time was added to the clock. And, for us novices, I just don't know how that's possible.
I don't either. I looked at the clock and our timing and scoring system, and that last session, everybody made it in the time that we had on the clock. There weren't any adjustments made.
Thank you.
All right, wrap it up with Jeff Gluck.
Jeff Gluck, USA Today. I understand that you still want to get feedback from the industry and evaluate things, but as it stands now, was NASCAR happy with how today's session unfolded?
I think it's a balance, Jeff. I think, Jeff Gordon on the pole, certainly, his last Daytona 500 is great. Seeing the incident that took place is not. And so it's a balance. We've got to take everything kind of in stride. We see new things every day and have to make decisions on that. So overall, I think, we're happy about the excitement of the qualifying session, but we've got to look at, if there's adjustments we can make to continue to improve it, we're going to do that.
All right, thanks, Steve.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
everybody.